welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us in my journey to learn more about IFC. Like you already know about this, Dion Moult is very kindly teaching me these principles. So Dion, where we left last time? Was it IFC classes today or?
Yeah, so maybe just before we begin, just a heads up that this is our first time doing this as a live stream. So if anything goes wrong, well, that's because it's our fault. But we will try and improve and do it better next time. And we should probably also mention that this is being streamed and recorded in case it wasn't obvious. So maybe if you have a privacy issue or something and you don't want yourself to be recorded, or you're not being recorded, but just change your name, use an alias or something so we don't see who you are.
Sure.
But otherwise, should be okay, I think.
Yeah. Can you please adjust a little bit your webcam? You are on the side. Can you
I'm off center. Here we are. Is that better? Okay, there we go.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So I see there's 23 people watching, and hopefully you can see my screen somewhere. So last time we talked a little bit about an introduction to openBIM and IFC, and today we'll be having a chat about IFC classes, which is kind of like the first thing you learn when you get into IFC. But maybe before we begin, we'll just do a quick reminder of what openBIM is and what IFC is, just in case there are beginners in the audience. If you know the stuff, just bear with us for a moment. We do want to cover the basics, and maybe just feel free to post questions in the chat so that we can address what the audience is interested in. I see we've got some new people who have joined. So the openBIM in a nutshell is basically BIM that's not locked into a vendor. So most people practice BIM that is locked into a vendor. So any data you create, any models that you create can only be accessed with proprietary software or a software by a particular vendor, and it's very difficult to transfer that data across vendors. So openBIM is saying, all right, if we want to collaborate, let's create data in a way that is not, or have workflows in a way that's not locked into a particular vendor. So that's all that openBIM is. And one of the ways of doing that is by following an international standard. And the most popular one is IFC. And IFC is a set of data standards or a set of agreements of how data should be organized and how data should be structured so that we can have software that talks to one another pretty easily. So just to clarify a couple misconceptions that we addressed in our previous video, IFC is not a data format. It's not a file format. IFC is a set of agreements of various concepts that we use in BIM. So for example, in order to get our BIM data from one platform to another, we need somebody to agree on what a wall is, or what a door is, or what a slab is. And so somebody had to sit down and create a document that says, okay, this document defines a wall, this document defines a door, and defines that doors can be placed inside walls. And so when you create your data, your data can describe concepts like walls and doors, and you can confidently send that across to another vendor, and they can understand the data. And that's pretty much what IFC is. It's that set of agreements of objects like doors and windows and slabs, and the relationships between objects, like for example, a door can be in a wall can be in a building, and a series of attributes or properties or metadata that you can then attach to these objects and relationships. For example, an object might have a material, or it might have a fire rating, or it might have a product warranty, or it might be have an attached PDF describing its uses or things like that. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense.
Yeah, Dion,
and with that,
if I may ask you, if IFC is a set of rules of agreements, what is then the IFC file format? It's something practical that extends this?
Correct. Yeah, so the set of agreements is simply a way of describing the information, but to actually make this practical, to use it, you do need a way of transferring that data. And one way you can transfer data is by saving it to a file and sending that file to somebody else, which somebody can open. And as a result, the IFC standard also describes a few different file formats that you can use these agreements with. And the one we know very well is something that ends in .ifc, and that is one particular file format. So we're getting some questions here. Anyone can see Moult's desktop in Twitch?
Yes, I think it's a little bit maybe misleading because you have opened the Twitch page. Can you browse to just to other page?
Yeah, so I'll go here on the OSR's page or something.
Yeah.
So where was I? I forgot where I was. What was I talking about, Petru?
You are trying to explain what is the file format IFC.
Oh yeah, so the IFC file format is just one way of transferring IFC data, but it's not the only way. There is, even you might have come across different IFC files. Some might end in .ifc. You might have also come across something that ends in .ifc zip, and that's two different ways of transferring IFC data. But there can be even more than that. There can be IFC XML or IFC JSON. So when people say things like IFC is simply a file, which is a huge file and can only transfer an entire model at a time, that's because they're looking at IFC in terms of that .ifc file. But if they realize, hey, IFC is just a set of agreements, it becomes a lot more flexible. You can transfer it in JSON format, and you can have it speak between different servers. And IFC can be something to transfer little bits of data on the cloud, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And that many people are not used to working with IFC in that way.
Yeah.
But it just shows you that there are many alternate ways that IFC can be transferred, and that file is just one of them.
Okay, thank you very much for the very good explanation.
Yeah, so today we'll be talking about classes in IFC, and this is a pretty fundamental topic. And you might have heard the term class in terms of what IFC means. IFC stands for Industry Foundation Classes. So when we talk about classes in IFC, it's the same word as in the title of IFC, Industry Foundation Classes. And the word class is a funny word that was taken from the software development industry, and it means a lot to people who are software developers, and they'll hear the word class, they'll know exactly what it means. Mm-hmm. But most of us are not software developers. So another way of looking at the word class is to think of it as a concept. So whenever, so IFC is a set of agreement of many different concepts in our industry, and each concept is given a class in IFC. So just to make it simple, let's use the word concept and class interchangeably if we don't want to get into the technical details. So for example, a wall is a single concept which can be described in IFC. Somebody wrote a book on it and said, you know, this is a wall. It can have these attributes and these properties and these whatevers. A wall is a class. Somebody wrote the same thing about the same definition about a slab, and so a slab is a class, a door is a class. And very often when people are introduced to IFC, this is the first time they'll come into contact with the term class. It's objects. So a bit like how if in proprietary software, you can categorize your objects. You know, you can select a bunch of objects and say you are a door, or select a bunch of objects and say you are a wall. These things like doors and walls are classes in IFC. So maybe the best way to describe it is to take a look at a BIM application. I've just launched up Blender BIM here, and we've got a small little scene on our screen, just a small room with maybe a few things inside of it, but otherwise a pretty simple scene. And the first way I'll describe classes is in a way for that you might come across it as a user. For the more technical people in the audience, don't worry. We will go into a bit more detail on what IFC classes are. But just to begin with, let's keep it real simple. And for most people, what an IFC class would present itself to you as is a type of object. And so, for example, if I click on this wall, you can see it says here, IFC wall standard case on the top left. If I click on this object here, this table, it says on the top left, a furnishing element, IFC furnishing element. All of these are examples of classes or concepts because it is a concept that can be described in IFC. And this is extremely important in IFC because when you create BIM models, like this simple room, it's very important to create them using the correct IFC class. So if I created this wall, but I called it a slab, then, well, my BIM data is garbage. It's misleading and incorrect. But it's very important to assign it the right IFC class. And so every time I look at an object, I can see on the top on, can I grow this? Here we are, here. I'll make this a bit bigger just in case the screen's a bit blurry. So so you can see the drop down here that says class, and if I click that, and there's a lot here, you'll see a huge list, and it's crazy because I've zoomed it up on my screen, but you'll see a huge list of IFC classes, and each one of these is a concept that IFC can describe. So I can pick from this, and for example, you can see things like slabs, stairs, switching devices, members, beams, railings, plates, piles, and so on. So you can see that all of these classes help describe a very rich set of type of objects that you can see in the real world. So is that starting to make a bit of sense? That every time you want to describe a concept in openBIM, you have to give it a class, and for most people, these are the types of classes they'll be looking at, as in they're just, well, I guess regular categories, I guess you could call things.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So for that introduction, it's actually pretty simple. If you're used to categorizing objects as walls and doors in your existing BIM software, it's no different than IFC. You just have to have a little bit of discipline in making sure that you click and select the right class when you create your BIM model. And just a word of warning that if you are using a different BIM software, which you have to import or export to IFC, and you've already called something a wall in that software, the chances are that your BIM software is automatically converting that from, let's say, a Revit wall or an ArchiCAD wall or whatever into an IFC wall. So over here on the top, on the right here, you can see IFC wall, but it's not guaranteed because, you know, IFC has one set of concepts and your program has another set of concepts, and sometimes there's a translation mismatch. And so this is why it's pretty important for people who want to use openBIM effectively to understand that there are these IFC classes, and there's quite a few of them. And once they know what they are, it can help towards better categorization of BIM model data. So we'll take a brief break and see if there are any questions.
Yes, if somebody is wondering about anything, just please feel free to write your questions in the chat window, and I'll ask Dion about it. But Dion, all those classes you had there in Blender Vim, is it something you come up with when you wake up in the morning, or what happened?
Well, I admit sometimes when I wake up in the morning, that's what I do, but not for that one. So the thing that's the thing about openBIM. In openBIM, just it's part of an international standard. So if you're not sure whether something should be called a wall or a slab or something, there is a document which you can read, which will describe to you exactly this ISO standard definition of what a wall is or what a slab is. And that way, everybody can agree on what to call their objects. And so I am going to go to the place to look at if you really want to read all this stuff is technical.buildingsmart.org, and you can click on standard and then IFC specification database. And then you'll be brought to a page which will show you for each IFC version where to the documentation page. And once you're in there, you can go and here and see on the left side of my screen, I can see a whole bunch of different classes. And if you browse through here, this will explain it to you. But this is a really scary document, and I won't recommend it to people who are just getting started. Another really good resource I would recommend if you just want to get a feel for what classes exist in IFC that's relevant to you as a user.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about the more technical classes later. So don't worry for those who are in the audience and are a bit more technical. We'll get to that. But for a user, most of the time, you're interested in the classes that define objects, things like walls and doors. So if you go to the Blender BIM site, there's a page called Which IFC Class Should I Use?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little search engine. So if you just type in whatever you're interested in, like if I type in wall, you can see, okay, here's curtain wall, IFC wall, and it gives a short description. And this is a very easy way of finding out what IFC classes there are. So give me a building object, Petru, and let's try our luck.
Floor.
Oh, well, there we go. So you can have a covering, like floorboards, for example. You have a IFC slabs. This is one of those funny things in IFC. It's called a slab, even though it's a floor. I guess you can have floor waste as well. That's something with floor in the name. But yeah, so that and it might seem like a lot to learn, but after you've applied it on a project once, you get the hang of it. Just kind of like the first time you learn the categories in your existing BIM software. Spend a bit of time. It's quite easy to pick up.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Mr. Miller from Denmark is saying that it might be a little bit early for questions. So let's go ahead with the more interesting content.
Okay. So what we've seen so far is that we've seen lots of different IFC classes which describe objects. And one way we can call an object in IFC is an element. But there are many different types of classes and or concepts. And concepts which describe a single object is just one category. And another category is element types. So for example, let's say you have 5 walls, 2 are masonry, and 3 are stud walls or partition walls or something. You can group two of those masonry walls as one type of wall type construction. It's a masonry wall construction. The other 3 walls you can group it as a stud wall construction. And that grouping into a construction type is another big category of IFC classes that users have to deal with. So those are called element type classes. And you can see here that when I change the drop down, it changes the ones below it. So if I change to element type, you can see that there are a whole bunch of IFC classes, and they all have type at the end of it. So the one I was using in my example would be a wall type class, which would be over here. So I can say, okay, this is the wall type. And then I can say, all right, okay, so all partitioning, this is one particular wall type, one particular partitioning wall type. And there are 3 walls which have that one wall type. So remember how we talked about in IFC, there are agreements for objects and then relationships between those objects. This is an example of 2 different objects. One is the wall, one is the wall type, and the relationship between them, which says that this wall is of this particular wall construction type. So taking a look at this model, everything you click here, you can see there's no type at the end of it. That's because it's an actual wall or an actual slab. But then if I go into the properties, you can see that it says here type, and it says that this wall is actually part of this basic wall type, which is 250 millimeters thick. And if I press this button, it's selected all of the walls in my project that are of the same wall type, wall construction type. So that's another big category of classes. Is that kind of making sense?
Yeah.
So wall types are just like, element type classes are just like element classes in that they can have their own properties and attributes and all that kind of thing. But it gives an idea that classes are more than just objects. They can be object types as well. Now, another example of what a class can describe, and it's really easy to just sort of discover for yourself here. You just click on the drop-down, right? So another one here is a spatial element. So classes can also describe not objects, but spatial concepts. A building, which can contain a whole bunch of other objects. And it's the same thing here. So over here on the project hierarchy here, you can see that there's a building story with a whole bunch of objects that are inside that building story.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a class, and this is also a class. And they have a relationship that describes it, that this class is inside that class. So after you get used to it, you'll start learning all of the different classes you can use, or all the different concepts you can use in IFC.
Mm-hmm.
And each one of those is called a class, and that's why it's called Industry Foundation Classes. So it's really not a scary concept for users. The developers, they'll have to worry about classes in a much more difficult way, but for users, it's really not a scary concept. Just anytime something is described in your BIM model, it belongs to a class, and you should pick the right one.
Yeah, makes sense. Arki Guru is asking something. If these nested concepts, and he asked before you presented this last bit.
Yes, so absolutely. And we're starting to get a little bit technical, which I want to avoid for the introduction. But classes follow a hierarchy. So let's say we have an object. So this is my object, and this is my object class, and then we have another class which describes my building. And there is a relationship which describes, which says that this object belongs to that building. Now, classes have many different attributes and properties. So this object might have a name, for example. It might have an ID. It might have a description. And this building class might also have a name. It might also have an ID, and it might also have a description, and so on. So, however, the object might have some things that a building does not. So, for example, an object might be part of a particular construction type. If I can write that with my mouse. I'll try. So the object is special because a wall might be part of a particular wall type, but a building doesn't have a building is not a particular construction type.
Mm-hmm.
That concept doesn't really make sense. So you can see how at this point we can have, let's see if I can create new annotations here. So this set of attributes are shared, but this attribute is new. It's specific to objects, but it's not specific to buildings. So whenever a class has a series of attributes which are shared, one way which IFC can make it easier for developers, and I stress that this is really a concept that developers need to be familiar with, they can share attributes. So you can possibly say that, okay, this class and this class might come from a shared class. And then if I can, let's see if I can scribble that one out. And then we'll have another class here, which adds the construction type attribute. So this is all a little bit technical for users, but
just a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't really want to get into this stuff because in I don't want this to confuse people into thinking that, oh, does that mean that if I find a name for my building, my object inherits that name and the name is copied over or something? No, it doesn't mean anything like that for the user. This is purely a way for guys who are digging really into the BIM software to make it easier for them to manage and manipulate data. And if you are really interested, there on the specification, every time you look at a class, you can see this tree, and it says here entity inheritance, and it will tell you that this class actually came from this class, which came from this class, which came from this class.
Mm-hmm.
But as a user, you will never ever need to touch these classes. They are not relevant to end users. So I do want to stress that.
Mm-hmm.
But you are correct. From a technical perspective, classes do inherit from one another. But as I've shown here before, there are many different types of classes in IFC, and thinking about them in terms of what they inherit from is a good way of understanding IFC classes. So we will talk about it a bit, but I don't want to talk about this, really technical thing of how they inherit attributes and relationships and things like that. So we won't go into that type of detail. But one way we can look at it, because you'll see here, this is here's a bunch of classes. If I click this, here's a whole bunch of other classes. I can change here. Here's another whole bunch of classes, right? Groups of things or structural classes. There are lots and lots of classes, and it's helpful to understand these in terms of categories. And when it comes to IFC, there is one easy way to split all the classes you have to pay attention to. And now we're starting to get a little bit more technical. In IFC, there are two main categories of classes you can think about. One of them is called a rooted class, and the other one is called a non-rooted class. So a rooted class, which I'll call R here, and another one I'll call a non-rooted class. They have a whole bunch of children classes and so on. And these also have a whole bunch of children classes. A rooted class are classes which share 4 very special attributes. And these 4 attributes make it useful to users. Non-rooted classes do not have these 4 very special attributes I'll talk about in a bit, and that makes them pretty much useless to users. Users should not be paying attention to them. Developers should, but not users. Mm-hmm. So a rooted class has 4 attributes, and these 4 attributes are a name, an owner. Sorry, I should have started with ID. It has an ID, a unique ID. We'll call it a GUID, and it has a description. So because it has an ID, it means that when you create a BIM object that is rooted, you can uniquely refer to it as long as your BIM model exists. You can say that, aha, and an example of a rooted class is walls and doors. Each wall and door is a rooted class, and so each wall and door has a very specific ID. We call this a GUID or a global ID. And this GUID lets you uniquely identify that object for the entire duration of the existence of that BIM model. And it's specially computed so that it is unique, completely unique. And it's not just unique to the project, it's unique forever if it's done correctly. So what that means is that you can have an entire digital twin of cities made up of many, many, many IFC data sets, and you would be able to very, very accurately effectively say, give one ID, and that can pinpoint a single screw in a single building and a single floor and a single wall or something like that. And that's what makes it special, because this is something we want to keep track of and something we want to pay attention to. A name is something that's useful for humans. It's like the human version of an ID, but it's not necessarily unique. It's something that humans can read and we can understand. The owner are for things like legal liability, who created it, who's responsible for it, who's changing it. Then we have a description, which is, the name speaks for itself, the description of the object. So everything which I've shown you here are all rooted elements. And I would say all the time, maybe there's an exception I'm missing, but all the time, pretty much, as a user, you're going to be dealing with a rooted IFC class. You're not going to be caring about non-rooted. An example of a non-rooted class are when you need to describe a concept like a coordinate, right? Or the location of an object,
Mm-hmm.
or a vector, or a piece of geometry, or a color. You know, all of those things are useful, right? You need vectors and colors and coordinates to describe the geometry in our BIM models and so on and so forth. But they are not objects that we care about in BIM, not explicit objects that users care about. And so if you are looking to take the next step and dig into the IFC documentation, a good way of understanding the hundreds and hundreds of classes that are presented to you in the specification is to look at it in two categories. You have rooted stuff which matters to users, and non-rooted stuff, which is just technical detail, computer implementation things. Is that helping?
I think we should not talk at all about non-rooted stuff.
We won't. Okay, we won't talk about them. A good resource to find out about the whole category of classes is this page on the OSArch wiki. You go into wiki.osarch.org and you click on what is an IFC class, and that will bring you to this page. So you can see it's just described in the technical sense rooted classes and those 4 attributes we just talked about. And then it says of those things which are useful to users, there are then 3 categories of classes. There are objects like nouns, you know, walls and doors, and but also nouns like a task, right? In construction scheduling, it could be a resource that would be used. Then you have another set of classes which describe properties. So these are the attributes or metadata that can then belong to objects. And finally, you have relationships. You have, because you need a class or a concept to describe the fact that a door can be in a wall. So those are the 3 main ways of thinking about it. You have things, properties / metadata, and then you have relationships between those things and properties and things and things and properties and yada, yada, yada. Then it breaks down more and more and more. And if we get into this, you'll be on your way towards really digging into the guts of openBIM. So we won't go into it, but this is where to read in case you don't want to read in case you're wondering how to make sense of the main documentation.
Okay, cool. Let me challenge you with something. Mostly of what you presented, it's for for more technical people, right? How can we, for example, designers or architects, people that don't have such an in-depth understanding of IFC classes, how they can use this in their daily work? What is the minimum necessary to know, and that can help you to create better models?
Yeah. So the absolute minimum is what I talked about at the very beginning, is calling things the right object. So picking the right class. When you have a wall, call it an IFC wall. If you're not sure if there's such a thing as an IFC wall, go to the search engine, which I've shown you here, and type in wall and see what comes up. And then once you've exported it, load it up in a viewer. If you don't have a viewer or you don't want to pay for one, if you're on Windows, you can use XBIM or you can download the Blender BIM add-on. Just click on objects and see what they are, and make sure that they are the right type of class. See if that's coming through correctly. For example, if I click on this thing here, these window blinds, you can see that the class says building element proxy. And this is an example of an incorrectly configured IFC class.
No,
This is kind of,
are you sure
yeah,
that it shouldn't be a proxy? Yeah, it looks like a proxy to me. I'm just
well,
joking.
all right. No, but actually you're right, because I'm sure there's some people in the audience who know the stuff inside out, and they'll go like, hey, this is 2x3, isn't it? And then awnings are only introduced in 4, therefore this is validly a proxy, or some ridiculous thing like that. And they're absolutely right. But let's just skip the detail. And for most cases, if you come across something which is called a proxy, that's probably because somebody has not configured their classes correctly. And this makes life difficult, right? If you don't call your walls, how can you automate things like clash detection, right? Your priorities in there. How do you automate things like scheduling? How can somebody confidently do quantity takeoff if you're not calling things correctly? All of these things are not possible if you do not call your classes the correct things. And as a result, people have to come up with many alternate company standards. So the biggest impact you can make as a user who doesn't want to get into all the technical stuff is call your things the right IFC class. A building element proxy, 9 times out of 10, is the wrong IFC class. There's usually something better. This is usually used by software as a default, like a fallback for I don't know, like a generic model. There is no such thing really as a generic model in IFC. Even building element proxies has a purpose, like it's meant the specific point of a proxy. Though in the next version of IFC, there will be a real generic model. But if you're calling everything a generic model, what's the point of BIM? You might as well just go back to modeling stuff in SketchUp and Rhino and not even call it, and putting things in a CAD layer, and everybody's CAD layers are different and all that. So this is the first step to getting things right. And now the best place to make sure you do get this right, and probably a lot of the viewers on this stream are using proprietary software, so I will cover that. If you are using open source software like the Blender BIM add-on, you're covered, you're sweet. It's easy as pie for you. You create an object, whatever it is. So we're going to create a monkey, because all of you must have a monkey in your buildings.
Yeah,
it's simple.
A class.
You click on, it's a class, IFC monkey. We'll find it. So all you have to do is click on what it is. So this is obviously a boiler. It's a water boiler. Come on. And it's a user-defined boiler called monkey. So you click on it, you click assign IFC class, and you're done. That's all there is to it. It's super easy to do, no problem. You press export, it will just work. And it will work everywhere. It will be called an IFC boiler monkey. Now, but if you're on this call and you are using proprietary software, I will spend 5 minutes on that, simply because I know that that's life, Not everybody's using open source yet. We will.
Not everybody, only you.
Yeah, that's right. Me and my monkey. So what was I doing? Oh, that's right. So, okay, so here's okay, if you are using Revit, lucky for you, it's on the main page. We've got like a whole bunch of articles here on how to do things better with Revit. And you can see here, it says how to export correct IFC classes from Revit. Now, before you read that one, read the first one, which is how to set up Revit for openBIM. And this will give you shared parameter files and all that type of stuff. And Revit comes with class mappings, so that a Revit object will automatically convert into a particular IFC object by default, which you can then potentially override. But then you can read this document, which will describe the steps. Now, I have to just beware, because you know how in here you click what you want and then you press assign. In Revit, it's not so simple. Sometimes you can manually type in the class, like it's not a dropdown. You have to type in IFC boiler or something like that. But sometimes it doesn't quite work. And if you are wondering why, or you want to know the full details, read this page. There are like 7 rules which Revit checks in turn to determine what that IFC class becomes. And it's really convoluted. There are some things which are hard-coded in the exporter, which you can't change. And then there's ways of manually overriding it here or manually overriding it there. And then there are some exceptions in case it's this or that or the other. So the details are all on this page. So if you're ever wondering why something's not exporting into the correct IFC class when it's coming from Revit, read this page. It will tell you why. Hopefully, now that Autodesk has supposedly certified it for IFC4, hopefully we can just delete this page and it will just work. But that's not yet released yet. So we don't know. Until it's released, read this page and it'll give you what you need to know. There is probably a, I don't have a guide here for ArchiCAD. ArchiCAD uses, it's a lot simpler. You can make anything, right? Any object in ArchiCAD can become any IFC class. It's pretty simple. So I didn't think we really needed to write a guide for that. But just check with your documentation of whatever BIM program you're using.
Sure. Do you want to show us something more about this, or should we take the questions?
Well, we've been chatting for 45 minutes. Maybe we'll see what the questions are.
Yeah, we have some questions, 2 questions we did not answer yet. So if anybody wants to ask more, just please go ahead. Let's start with Hos Zamani. He's asking is IFC, like for example JSON, that you can assign any property to any object, or you need to adhere to a specific set of property for a specific class?
Right. So this is a very good point, and I'm so sorry that we didn't get into this level of detail on IFC classes, because we probably should have, right? 45 minutes. What was I talking about? Wasting time, chatting, talking about monkeys. So there are 2 main ways that a user, 3, 4, okay, we'll keep it simple. One basic way of adding data to an IFC class is by giving it an attribute. So for example, here's my boiler. And if I go to my object properties, you can see on the right here it says attributes. And you can see it has an attribute of a predefined type, which is set to user defined, and an object type, which is set to monkey. And I can add an attribute called global ID. But you noticed that I had to click to this drop down and press add attribute. And this suggests that you can only pick attributes from this very limited selection. I can only give it a name, a description, a tag, and so if I just add them all, that's it. I run out of data I can add. So attributes are very basic but fundamental lowest common denominator data that you can set on classes. And 9 times out of 10, the classes you're going to be dealing with are going to have the 4 attributes that we talked about earlier. That's the name, the description, we won't talk about the legal owners and liability. That's a separate thing, and an ID. The ID will be created. It's generated automatically for you. So it's just a name and a description that you'll be worrying about. And in addition, 9 times out of 10, you'll also be able to give it what's called a predefined type. So sometimes, simply because there are so many things in the built environment, you don't want to create a new IFC class for everything. Sometimes in the interest of developer efficiency, and this is purely a technical reason, it's not really a user thing, there is there is another layer of way of assigning a class. So you can say, not only is this a boiler, this is a water boiler, this is a steam boiler. And then if you run out, you can click on user defined and you can specify monkey. And those is a very small set of attributes, and it's all part of the ISO standard. You cannot change it, you should not change it, and you also should not put whatever you want in it. There are rules to follow. So for example, name. I can't just type in boop, beep, boop, beep. There are rules about what should be in that field. There are rules for what should be in this tag field, and the ISO standard describes those. So for example, in the name attribute, there is a definition which basically says, you know how in paper documentation, let's say you have a wall type and you tag it or you annotate it or you label it or whatever, you label it with a small short code like XYZ123. That's what you should put in this name field. So if this was boiler type, boiler 01, I would put ball 01 on my in that field, because that's what the ISO standard says should be in there. And if you don't, so for example, if you have big schedules of things and you have like a name column, that's what should be in here. What you should not have is, if I click on this wall, the name should not be basic wall : 250 mm space 2 : 2035. That's garbage data. It doesn't make sense. It's not useful to you. You are not going to see that on any one of your paper documentation. It should not be there. So that's a good rule of thumb. BIM is simply a way of taking what you're already doing on your paper documentation and putting it in standardized locations. So to answer your question, you cannot assign any attribute to an object. There is a clear set of rules of what you can assign to each object. Now, you might say, okay, Dion, that's great and all, but I'd like to have more than 6 things I can assign to my object. I want to put things like fire ratings and to my walls and all that. This is where something called properties comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And classes can have properties assigned to it. So if I scroll down here, you can see I can have sets of properties. A set simply means a group of properties under a common heading, like constraints, for example, or dimensions. And then underneath that heading, there's a whole bunch of other properties which have, again, key and value. And in this one, there are a series of property sets which are defined by the ISO standard by Building Smart International. So, for example, if this thing is a wall, I can click on this, and it said a wall is allowed to have all of these property sets. So for example, you can see wall common here. So if I add that property set to the bottom, oh, it's already there. So you can see that this one says pset _ wall common. And these properties are, again, belonging to an ISO standard. You're not allowed to change them. You're not allowed to change the name pset wall common. You're not allowed to change the name of the attributes. You're not allowed to change and there are clear definitions of the units which need to be in here, how it's meant to be formatted, and all those types of things. And all of those are part of an international standard, which we should get into and maybe in another conversation in more detail.
May I ask, somebody is asking, so because we are here, what ISO standard is this? So we can...
Oh, okay, yeah, might as well. So for example, if you go in the specifications database, there are I would say mainly 2 ISO standards which people are using. You have, most people are stuck on 2x3, which migrate to 4. You should do it. It's a good thing to do. Anyway, but if you're not doing it, this is the ISO standard, and this is the ISO standard for the latest ISO publication of IFC 4.
Okay.
And I highly recommend migrating to this one. It's got a lot more cheese in it than this one.
Thanks.
A lot more classes. So everything I described here, it's possible to read in here. So for example, I'll give you this is just for the technical. If I go and click on computer slow because I'm streaming here or I'm video calling. So if I click on IFC wall, the standard will say this IFC wall is allowed to have these properties assigned to it. You know, acoustic rating, fire rating, whether it's combustible or not, and so on and so forth. So you know how every company has like their own company standard of properties and all that? Stop doing that. Check if it's in the ISO standard, and if it is, try to match that one first. And of course, the world is big and complex, so let's say you cannot find something. So let's say you want to assign the number of a property which has something to do with monkeys specifically, and it's not there in the ISO standard. You can then create your own custom property set. And so you'll notice how this one has the word pset _ wall common. The prefix pset _ means it's part of the ISO standard. And this one follows exact definition to part of that ISO standard. The rest of these, which do not have PSET, are just random stuff. In this case, it's coming from Revit, so Revit can do whatever it wants. It's not part of the standard, it's just a Revit thing. You also notice that, we won't go too far into detail, but hopefully that makes a bit of sense. Long and short of it is there are a lot of already standardized properties to assign to objects. As much as possible, stick to the ISO ones. But if you cannot find what you're looking for, there are ways to add your own and to define your own property set. That's the jargon you're looking for.
Okay, cool. Dion, we have 5 minutes, 5 more minutes. So I know you enjoy a lot going into details. Let's try to respond to these last questions quicker. Is the Cyber Pope asking if can this add-on can be used for creating working drawings within Blender?
Oh, all right. Well, that's off topic. The answer is technically yes, but the practical answer is not without a lot of pain. It's still a work in progress, but if you can code, please join. We are developing the ability to create construction drawings, and we're doing it in a very, and in particular, the way we're doing it is directly from IFC. And many people believe IFC is a 3D only format. That's not true. IFC can certainly be used to store 2D information, things like annotations and sectional details and patterns and all the rest of it. And we are using that to generate drawings. And if I just search here, I'll give 2 examples of documentation which has been created, maybe drawing demo or something. So that's some old stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's one example of a drawing created with it. This is another example of a drawing that's created with that's created directly from IFC. So it wasn't as if somebody then annotated it later. And all this data that you see here, all the tags, all the grids, all the labels, all that is stored directly in the IFC file. And here's another example of random documentation. Is it ready for you to use? Depends how technical you are. For regular users, no. Simple as that.
If I can add something to this, you don't need to be a coder to contribute. There are many ways to contribute. You can promote it. If you can afford to contribute with $5 or something a month, it can mean a lot because it adds up. If more people contribute, then we can get and hire more developers to develop more features and come to that point where it can be used for drawing productions. Which, if Dion, you can quickly show us the roadmap. That is a very important milestone, I would say. That is going to be very, very cool when we will reach that one, right?
Yes. So the BlenderBIM add-on has a roadmap that we're looking to do. Basically, the end goal is to completely replace all proprietary software, and you can do everything with open source software, and you can do it. And more importantly, it's highly modular and decoupled, so you can build your own workflows. So especially if you are working in a large firm or you have technical know-how, this will provide you a lot of power that a monolithic tool will not. So we're currently in the first phase where we're basically building a lot of alpha quality stuff. We're building and breaking things. We're releasing early, releasing often, and there will be bugs, and that's just the nature of it. Mm-hmm. And the second phase, which will be sometime next year, I believe, is when most of the basic features are there and we can start producing basic commercial output. And as in for regular users, not just with a lot of pain for highly technical users. So that's the next milestone. And obviously the third milestone after that is it's a staple. Basically, you can switch your workflow away from proprietary software. You'll never need to buy another license again in your life. Go for it.
Yeah, and everybody can contribute. Like I said, you can help if you don't have the money to contribute to something. If you don't know coding, you can help promoting, you can help with writing some documentations. There are many ways to contribute. So if everybody is welcome to join.
Yeah, and don't forget that, and please check out osarch.org. This sounds like an ad now, but basically, we are trying very hard to teach people more about these open ways of working, and it really does benefit not just open source guys, but everybody, even if you're using proprietary platform. Because right now, what people are doing with BIM software is not that much better than everybody having their own Excel spreadsheet and kind of just making columns up as they go.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that much different, just that one has better buttons and one has an interface that doesn't look like a spreadsheet. But fundamentally, your data is just as messy and disorganized and unstructured as Bob's Excel spreadsheet that he created 3 years ago before he left the company. It's no different. And so getting your data clean and right is very important. And there's a lot of ways to learn about it. And right now, it just so happens that open source software is one of the best ways to understand this data. You'll notice that things I'm demonstrating here in the Blender BIM add-on, there is no translation. What you see in the interface is exactly the data you're putting into IFC.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no hiding things. It's not like in a proprietary software where you do things one way in the interface and then you go through 15 dialog boxes to set up mapping tables and configurations and check boxes, this one, that one, and this one. All of that disappears. You're just easily creating openBIM directly in the software.
Okay.
And so if you do want to learn, this is a great way to learn as well, to make sure you're doing correctly when you return in as a stopgap measure before the stuff becomes production ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we should wrap it up right now. Everybody, I'm really sorry we did not manage to answer to all the questions, but we can note them and answer to the next session. Because if you are interested to join us, we'll try to do this each Monday at the same time. What you say, Dion? Would this be interesting?
Let's do it. Yeah. By the way, we did not expect all these people to rock up today. This was just an experiment, but I think this is pretty cool. We should have a regular chat about this. If you want to chat offline, there's also the community forums you can sign up for. Yeah. And there's also a live chat page where, in case you do wake up in the morning and you're thinking like, man, I wish IFC could create more classes, that's where you sign into, and you'll find a whole bunch of people here who will just chat with you because they're thinking the same thing.
Arkiguru, I really hope you did not waste your time. It's been the first time we're doing this, so definitely not the best. It's the first time for me as well, for Dion. I don't know, maybe he participated to other things as well, but we're trying to learn, and I'm really looking forward to improve the format and everything, and for the future meetings then. And so, stay tuned. We'll try to have this every Monday.
We should have a theme or something, or do something different every Monday to spice it up. We'll do something.
Yes, of course. We start now with this basic, or not basic, not so basic, because my head was blowing up at some point. It was too technical, but we'll try to find better ways to reach the most of people that are trying to understand and get into this. So thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to your feedback. Don't hesitate to give us your feedback through LinkedIn, through YouTube comments, because this presentation is going to be released as a video on demand on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, BIMvoice. And if Dion wants, he's welcome to publish it on his own channel as well, of course. Or he doesn't want. He doesn't like YouTube. He hates YouTube. Thank you very much. Have a nice day, everybody.
All right, see you around. See you next week.